A couple of years ago, me and my husband decided that we were sick of the pressures of Valentine's Day. The cards, the flowers, the last-minute bookings, and so on. Instead, decided that we'd make a whole week out of it. We thought if we could spread the romance over a period of 7 days, it wouldn't be as wearing, and we both wouldn't feel that stress every couple feels in the weeks leading up to it. So, living in the UK, we decided that it wouldn't be too hard to get to Lake Geneva, find a cabin we could rent for the week, remote, with perhaps a little restaurant a little drive away, and settle down. My husband spent some of his childhood there, and this gave him an opportunity to stop in on some of his old friends and family whilst we were there. It sounded like the perfect trip. We booked time off of work, scrolled some websites, and ended up finding this lovely semi-resort. It was essentially a collection of cabins or lodges made for couples. They were all fairly far apart from each other, but were connected by small gravel paths to a central area, which had a restaurant owned by a fairly famous chef, a lodge that acted as reception, and a spa. There were some facilities dotted around, but all with appropriate architecture, so even though it was pretty much a resort, it would never feel like it. Sure, it was a little expensive, but we saw it as an opportunity to combine a holiday and expensive Valentine's dinner. In a weird way, we thought we were saving money. The staff there were all incredibly polite when we arrived. They knew our names instantly from our online booking and made sure to whisk our bags away almost instantly. Whilst they went through the process of booking us in, they gave us each a complimentary cocktail and sat us by this vast glass window that overlooked the lake. It was unbelievably stunning and so quiet. That was what we appreciated the most, I think. A break from city life, somewhere where we wouldn't have to worry about the crowded bus or getting a cab after one too many glasses of wine. We were coming to the end of our cocktails when a man came and sat down next to us. He introduced himself as Luca and had one of those funny European accents where you can't quite place it. The English accent was almost perfect, but a couple of clipped vowels and funny consonants meant you could instantly tell he wasn't actually, well, English. He seemed friendly enough. Tall, athletic, wearing white tennis clothes. He asked us where we were from, and we said the UK, and we chatted for a little while about that. I do remember him saying that I looked just like his wife and that we should meet her. I remember that because he kept looking out for my doppelganger whenever we'd take walks around the resort, trying to see if I could spy curly blonde hair. We said that we were sure we'd catch him, either in the restaurant or perhaps the spa, and were intrigued to meet his wife. He seemed a little odd in his own way. His eye contact was a little too intense, and he spoke a little too loudly, but being British, we thought that maybe this was just a cultural difference. Unfortunately, February isn't the best time for a trip to a resort in Switzerland. The weather there can be pretty up and down, and for a lot of our time there we were pretty much rained out of doing anything outside. But we were a married couple and it wasn't hard to find things to do around Valentine's Day that required being inside. Luca's cabin must have been close to ours because we'd see him fairly often, on our walk to breakfast, passing through when we were having lunch, that sort of thing. I decided pretty quickly that I didn't like him. I decided that it wasn't a cultural difference, that he was actually quite rude and would always try to steer the conversation back to himself whenever we'd have a quick chat. He'd make a point of humble bragging about whatever he was off to do, and it began to make me angry. I was, at the end of the day, trying to have a week with my husband, and it was kind of ruining it. My husband snores, loud, and so quite often in the middle of the night, I'll get up and move to the sofa. It's sort of become a little ritual, and I don't mind really doing it. I can usually fall back asleep pretty quickly, if not instantly. Earplugs only go so far when you can genuinely feel the guy vibrating as he snores. Trust me. So the second night we're there, I get up and move to the couch in the front, which faces a huge glass panel overlooking the lake. I have to turn on a lamp to find my way around, not knowing the layout of the room off by heart like I do at home, and I see the window. The view is stunning. And even at night, if you sit and watch for a while and let your eyes adjust to the dark, you can make out lights across the water and begin to see the scenery. I was watching the view like this when I spotted something. It's funny how you can make out shapes in the dark, but I'd gotten used to the way the branches of the trees moved in the slight wind, which was why I noticed something so still. Still and in the shape of shoulders and a head. It was down the path a little way, the path that led into the resort, and it just stood there, watching something. I became very aware at that point of the lamp that was going on, and the fact that although this figure was just a dark shape to me, it could see right in and see me. I began to feel really, really scared. I didn't want to panic, but I started by saying my husband's name very quietly, then a little louder, then louder until I could hear the slight panic in my voice. The figure didn't move. It must have been about 100 feet away because I couldn't make out any features, just a shape. I called again and my husband came out of his room. He asked what was wrong, and when I tried to show him what I'd seen, the figure was gone. I guess it had seen someone else come into the house and had decided to leave. I explained what I'd seen, and although my husband was supportive, he said at that distance, at night, it could have been anything. Could have just been a member of staff doing a nighttime check or a security guard. Whatever it was, despite his snoring, I slept in his room for the rest of the night. The next day we had breakfast as usual. Luca came past and chatted to us for a little while. I didn't say anything. I began to become a little convinced that it had been Luca who had been watching me that night. I hated the way he talked about his wife whilst looking at me, as if just because we looked the same we were somehow connected. Although there was still a little anxiety from last night, I managed to enjoy most of the day. That night we slept in the same bed and I made sure to choose the side closest to the wall. Then it was Valentine's Day. Since our plan was to have the whole week to do it, we took it easy, having a late brunch at the restaurant. Just when I thought that maybe Luca had left, he came past. I thought it was strange that he wasn't with his wife, but he said something about her going on ahead to get a good court for tennis. We said we were considering an afternoon game, and I remember him seeming a little concerned. He told us that they were all booked up and that he thought that maybe we'd have better luck booking a day or two in advance. We were a little disappointed, but hey, it allowed us to have a Bloody Mary after brunch, so we weren't complaining. That night we got drunk after dinner, like, really drunk. I think we got a little carried away on their 2-for-1 Valentine's cocktails because we were giggling like school children. We chatted to a few of the other couples we'd met, ate some amazing food, watched the rain on the lake. Thankfully, Luca was nowhere to be seen. We stumbled back to our cabin, sharing an umbrella lent to us by the staff, and after doing what couples would do on Valentine's Day, my husband fell asleep. I lay in bed a while, had a couple of glasses of water from the sink to try and prevent the hangover I knew was coming. After I stopped the tap running, I thought I heard the drain stutter for a second. I listened a little closer. No, it wasn't a stutter. It was a noise like knocking, only a little more frantic. In triplets, dum, dum, dum. I listened again, the same noise, louder. Then I realized what it was. Someone was trying the lock on the window. They were trying to see if it was locked. As I stood there trying to make as little noise as possible as I moved across the room to wake my husband, I heard footsteps moving around the cabin, and then the same noise, but louder. The same person was trying the door now, but they were more determined, really pushing and pulling. I didn't want to make a noise, but I shook my husband as violently as I could to wake him up, and whispered what I thought was happening. He was dead to the world, and as I tried to wake him with a hushed voice, I could hear whatever it was trying the door a few last times, but harder. Finally, he woke up and saw the panic in my eyes. He got straight to it, turned on every light in the cabin, and grabbed a broom as he made his way to the front door. There was nothing. No one. I was sure, though, and he could tell from how I was acting that I was serious. We called the resort's security, who came over and were extremely polite, and even the manager of the place came down to assure us that it was all fine. They said they'd look into it, that sometimes the wind made noises like that, and were even so kind as to make sure a security member sat outside our cabin for the rest of the night. There were no signs that anyone had been around, and so they said if we were sure we wanted to report something, they'd happily come with us in the morning. As we were talking the next morning, I felt like I wanted to mention Luca, but didn't want to seem paranoid. But I'd barely slept and my mouth seemed to run on its own. I mentioned that Luca had always acted strange to us and that I thought his cabin might have been near ours. They told me that whilst it wasn't their policy to report on guests, they could tell me that Luca's cabin was actually fairly far away from ours. His was in the singles area, for people on retreats, writers, artists, etc., and that the couple's area was the other side of the resort. I mentioned that his wife must have been staying near us then, or something like that, and I remember the woman behind the desk looking puzzled. She said Luca came alone, left after lunch on Valentine's Day, and that there had been no woman with him at any point during his stay. He'd come alone and left alone. They'd have known any visitors have to at least sign in at reception. When I mentioned looking into this further, I was really rattled by the whole thing. They said although they would flag it with local police, there wasn't much they could do. Luca wasn't a Swiss national, and they couldn't follow him just because a guest thought that he might have been stalking them or something of the sort. They asked if I'd even seen Luca during either of the encounters I'd had, and sadly, I had to say no. When they heard that, they shared a look that I could instantly tell meant they didn't quite believe me. The resort offered all sorts of compensations, a free dinner the next